Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you all for this second session of the Insol Samvad series. And this one is entitled What the New Normal Means for Alternate Capital Providers. My name is Ashwin Bishnoi. I'm a partner with Khaitan and Company, and I specialize in restructuring and special situations. This issue is both timely and topical because there is alternative capital that is waiting, and there is a dire need for that capital in India. So we will discuss how do we make that twain meet. This session is getting recorded, and it will be available on Insol India's website and its handles. There will be a Q&A session at the end as well. I can see that we have 45 attendees. So if you have questions, please do put up your hand towards the end of the session, or better still, please post them in the chat box. Our panel today is superb. We have senior industry experts with great deal of experience and understanding in this space. It gives me great pleasure to introduce them to you. We have Mr. R.K. Bansal, who really needs no introduction. He is Managing Director and CEO of Edelweiss ARC, the largest ARC in the country. He used to serve as chairman of CDR EG, so I can safely say, and at the cost of taking some liberty from Mr. Bansal, he has seen it all. So it will be interesting to hear his views. We have Praveen Thomas, who is Executive Director and Senior Counsel with SSG, which is one of the major players in this alternate capital space. He has close to 20 years of experience in this space as well. We have Sonali Mahapatra. She's a partner with Talwar Thakur and Associates. She's a specialist in banking, finance, and restructuring in India and outside India, including her time with the Magic Circle firm Linklaters. Last and certainly not the least, we have Manish Agarwal. He's partner and heads the Energy, Infrastructure, M&A, and Special Situations Group with KPMG in India. He too has over 20 years of experience across many geographies and routinely advises alternate capital providers. A warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you for sparing time this evening. And we can, with that, get started. Mr. Chandyok, if you wanted to extend a welcome to them, after that, we can dive into the questions. And sir, you're on mute.
Well, you're in.
Sir, you've gone back on mute. Yes, that's fine.
On behalf of Insol India, its governing body, each one of us, we welcome you all and thank you for extending your time to us for this time of crisis. That I think Ashwin has already said, the topic is extremely relevant for us to discuss, and I'm sure we'll have a great time discussing this aspect with all of you. Thank you. Welcome you all. And welcome all participants. We are looking forward for you to participate and have question answers to the panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. With that, let us get started. Mr. Bansal, if I could ask you first, sir. You see, you've seen many credit cycles, many downturns. What are you seeing as the emerging new normal, given our theme being new normal? What are you seeing as the new normal for alternative capital providers in this COVID-19 era?
So thanks, Ashwin. And good afternoon to all. Thanks for allowing me to give my views on this program. See, we have seen number of cycles, I agree. If I start from the latest 20-30 years, in 99-2000, we had a big drop in overall economic activity and almost like a partly depression, I would say, recession type situation, where we had in CDR number of cases of restructuring, what we call 2099, where even cases, steel companies like JSW, SR Steel, all went through the restructuring. The only difference I find with that cycle was it suddenly economy picked up faster, and most of these cases came out of that cycle actually. Then we had this cycle going into 2008 after the GFC, but things, because government and RBI did a lot of efforts and things started moving back fast in 2009. And then the next round came from the huge actually upswing in the economic activity, especially in infrastructure, up to from 2009 to 2014, and then overcapacity between 14 and I would say 18. And somewhere in 18, things have started improving, but suddenly we had ILFS. And after September 18, because NDFC and because of this overall liquidity issue, we still had a problem. Things again started picking up, I would say, in 2019 end, but now we are again at the COVID situation in 2020. Now, it's difficult for, frankly speaking, for anyone to say when things would be normal. I think this is first time we are seeing this type of situation. All of us understand that. Nobody has seen perhaps a situation like this earlier. Even in any point of time, even if you have a war, we have seen the wars also in 65. But economic activity has not stopped much. But now first time we are seeing that people, all of us are sitting at home, many of us at least, and then industry is not able to work, and we had seen this labor migration issue. So I think it will take some time. As of now, it's difficult, but I would say from investment perspective, from ARC or stress asset funds, it will take some time for us to evaluate these proposals. Even for the seller, it will take some time to get it adjusted to this new reality. But I'm optimistic in that sense, maybe with a caution. We will be slightly cautiously in optimism, but things will improve, I am hopeful. So I think up to September, things should be normal, and we should be able to see new cases, new acquisitions, new deals happening.
No, I think thank you for that, Mr. Bansal. Praveen, if I could turn to you, because you also represent, in some sense, foreign capital. So, as a deployer of foreign capital, how do you see LPs thinking when deciding on whether to deploy in India or outside India? Because we keep hearing that today you can get the kind of emerging market returns in developed markets. So how do you see your LPs in reacting when faced with deployment in India?
Thank you, Ashwin. See, the thing to keep in mind is what kind of deployment. Are we looking at short-term, transitory, opportunistic deployment, or we are looking at long-term, strategic, long-term value deployment? Now, like we are searching on this call also for the new normal. It is what every LP is also doing. It's a search right now for the new normal. And while yes, when things go wrong and we are definitely in an unprecedented time, there is no question about it. You've never seen an economy like Mr. Bansal was saying that even during times of war, economies function normally. So it is natural for LPs to first look to their house to sort it. But and the fact remains that LPs and foreign capital will always look to the long-term normal too. So while this is transitory, and I agree with Mr. Bansal, like you're talking of the third quarter, maybe the next quarter, but in a couple of quarters, we would expect that emerging markets is still where available. Once, developed markets, there may be some blips and some troughs and highs, and there will be capital deployed or people just not deploying capital, which is what we're seeing nowadays. But in the long term, emerging markets still remains firmly on the radar. And but the time of when that activity will pick up is something that we need to see, because right now it is difficult to predict as to when that change will come. But I see net, I see it as a transitory movement, and the long-term story of emerging markets remains very much intact.
Manish, if I could come to you, it's widely believed that given that this crisis came quite suddenly, that private credit and special situation funds are sitting on large amounts of dry powder. Banks are also sitting with liquidity, but for whatever reasons are not lending. Does that really mean that this is truly the time for alternative capital, or are we reading too much into that question? And on a related point, generally speaking, what are you seeing your clients speaking of in these times? Is there a specific asset class that is emerging as more prominent or a new asset class?
Thanks, Ashwin. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks, Insol, for providing this opportunity. Now, two questions, Ashwin, you had asked, and let me attempt the first one. I think you're right. I mean, while the banking system, we all know, is flush with liquidity, they're not lending for a variety of further reasons. If you look at, let's say, what's happening, just to step back, I mean, this is a kind of a situation which, as Mr. Bansal also said, that there's no precedent to that. Everybody is just trying to figure out that what is the extent of a severity of this, because you have a global cycle. Not just India is impacted, but every other part of the world is impacted. Nobody has a handle on, let's say, we are still in a situation where we don't have a cure for a pandemic. Now, till the time you have a cure for a pandemic, after that is something that you start, let's say, getting back to a normal sort of a life. As of now, we are saying that, okay, we are opening up the lockdown. We are still thinking about how to exit this entire thing. We keep coming back and hearing the news that there may be a further lockdown. So I think we are still in a situation where we don't have a control of pandemic. And therefore, what it means for all the stakeholders now, whether it is a borrowers or whether it is, let's say, the banking system, the kind of assessment that one has to do, that let's say if I have to do a restructuring, I have to provide you some capital, for example, what is that extent is something which is very uncertain. Okay, so in that time of an uncertain, if let's say you present me a proposal, now whether this entire cycle will recover in 6 months, whether it is going to be 2 years or it is going to be 3 years, nobody has a sort of a view on. Until the time, a little bit of clarity. I'm not saying, I mean, I need to have an entire clarity, but if I have some clarity at least, that is very important, that how people start engaging seriously about it. So what do I need as a borrower? I'm not clear on. And therefore, what the banking system need to provide is also something which is unclear. What is clear is, at least to my mind, I think, and when we talk of alternate capital providers, I do believe that the repair in the balance sheet that we need to do at this point in time is not going to just happen by just being the debt capital being on the table. I strongly feel that you need some equity coming in as well. Just a pure credit flowing into this, and that to a sort of a more expensive credit, because you are going to price in this uncertainty as well, to my mind, which was not the case pre-COVID. Post-COVID, you have actually factored in a lot of an uncertainty into the situation. So I fundamentally believe that the solution, while I also say that there is going to be a good inventory of stress cases, most of the sectors, except let's say we see IT, pharma, healthcare, are going to be a stress, except these 4-5 sectors. But I think the solution can't be just a debt. It has to be some equity solution. And that's why I feel that the capital providers have to also think of what they do with the equity side of it, because a lot of these borrowers may not have an equity solution. The last point I would say is that, again, we have to look at the situations in broadly the 3 buckets, as I very strongly sort of feel. One, which requires a little bit of a nudge or a support. They are perfectly fine. Business models will recover. They will go back to the sort of a normal with a growth, but they need a little bit of a liquidity sort of a solution. So maybe a working capital, maybe some bit of a small amount of money is here, some deferments already with 6 months moratorium, maybe a little bit more, then they should be fine with. So this is the category we are okay with largely. The second category is where you actually need a very deep restructuring, to my mind. I mean, that is not going to be just sufficient with what, let's say, a moratorium is working currently. It is not going to suffice. They may not come back immediately soon, depending on how faster the recovery happens. So they will need a much more deeper restructuring. And there has to be a different ways to do that in the different scheme of things. I'm sure that we will cover it later, part of this webinar. And the third category, I mean, there would be companies which may not just survive as well. So I think if you look at these 3 buckets, I do feel the inventory of the stress situations is going to be much higher. It is going to be in the sectors which has so far we not seen. So there are many sectors which will come in, which will be of interest to the capital providers. Having said that, the pricing expectation will further sort of worsen, to my mind. And that is something we have to find a challenge with. And as I said, you will need some equity solution, not just a pure debt solution.
No, I mean, very good points, Manish. Absolutely, and the pricing mismatch is we will rightfully come back to that. It's an important point. But you also mentioned that there are different categories of debtors. And so, Sonali, that sort of brings to mind a question for you. You are aware the RBI has announced several measures in terms of deferring principal, interest, asset classification, moratorium, etc. Now, this has to some extent helped corporate India. But what does it really mean for alternate capital providers? Has it increased the market for them? Has it made the market more difficult for them? Should the RBI have done more? So let me frame the question for you. What does the RBI's measures mean for this asset class?
Sure. Thanks, Ashwin. So I think the RBI is rightly focusing on sort of the borrowers in India as well as the banks and the other capital providers in India, which it regulates, which is definitely the first sort of entities which the RBI will look at. And it's provided some relief to them in the form of the moratorium, etc. What the alternate capital providers bring is a new pool of capital, which, that pool being there is going to help the market overall, and it's going to help the existing providers as well. So I think, maybe I can speak for them to some extent that I don't think they're expecting any reliefs or they're expecting any concessions really. I think they're looking for clear rules. So there are a variety of options available for them where they can invest in the country right now. They have the ARC mode, they have NCDs, they have ECBs, they have a different, they have different sets of avenues where they can invest. I think if the rules continue, the rules are clear and consistent and they don't change. I think that's more important, that the rules don't keep changing. I think then the commercials will take care of themselves. And I don't think concessions are needed. I think just clarity is needed.
No, I agree. I think that's a perfect point. If you look at the ARC industry, those guidelines haven't changed since 2015, realistically. So, and today is when the ARC industry is needed. So, if the RBI is listening, it would be helpful, I think, to revive those guidelines and perhaps make them more relevant for where we are today. And I think that's a perfect segue also to come back to you, Mr. Bansal, sir. And Manish alluded to this. For any market to function, we need buyers and sellers to meet. And even before COVID, that meeting was not always possible on price. And of course, that strike price is going to become more difficult because of COVID. So what are you seeing as a means to try and bridge that gap? And I know it's a little early in the day, these deals are yet to come. But so if we could sort of rely on you to sort of look into the future as to what kind of ways and means can you bridge the pricing gap between buyers of distressed debt and sellers of distressed debt, specifically for the ARC industry?
See, as you rightly said, even before COVID, this price mismatch was continuing. It is not as if it was not there. And I've been seeing this mismatch for the last so many years anyway. It will always continue. Even if you see the number of the deals which are happening in stress asset space, though we talk of 10 lakh crore or 15 lakh crore, whatever, but number of deal wise in the year, I think you will not find more than 15-20 deals happening, despite all the funds taken together and ARCs, other than small cases which ARCs keep on buying. So last 2-3 years, the type of deal which have been happening is either a slightly bigger case where a fund comes or a financier comes, something like Bank of America or whichever way, and then you do a deal, or a stress asset fund buys the debt through ARC vehicle, and then otherwise ARCs normally buy the pool of the assets from banks or NBFCs. So the deals keeps on happening like that. Now, and I'm saying that after COVID, once things slightly normalize, in any case, during this period, perhaps deal will not happen. But one way of looking at this where the deals can happen perhaps is, I think banks have to start looking at ARC structure again, and RBI has reiterated those guidelines. Actually, there's no change as much in guidelines of ARC, but it is just like a reiteration of the existing guidelines. Banks may like to do a few assets. Maybe they can look at ARCs for warehousing type structure, or there could be more structured deal. See, finally, let us see what is the difference between what ARC or stress asset fund looks at a deal and what banks, the selling banks. Selling banks looks at three things normally when they do a deal. One, what is the net book value in my books? That is the net of provision, the total loan amount. Two, what is the security available to me? And three, what is the vintage of this NPA? Now, suppose this is a new NPA and I have made only 15% provision. And if I try to sell to a stress asset fund, which offers me, let's say 40%, then immediately I have to make another provision of 45%. So that deal will not happen. Take it from me. So you have to wait for some time. Either the provisioning goes up to a large extent, or maybe the deal happens maybe in some security research structure in the second year, where the provisioning is 25% and then ARC offers about 60 or 65, 70%. So the difference goes down. Or otherwise, you have to see the asset specific cases. So the other option can be, and the deal which happened last year, I think, a few of them, whereby promoter brings some money through his own means or by doing some asset sale which are non-core, and then he brings part of the money, and then ARC, the stress asset funds, puts the part of the money, while the bank still gets the value which he is saying. But if you really see, and I have gone through a number of banks list actually cases, many of them are in EPC segment where the deals may not happen in that cash segment. Banks are actually looking at the wrong way of doing only cash deals today. And this I am saying with after seeing the list only. And the other issue is you don't have that much capital neither in ARC nor stress asset funds. Total amount available in the entire industry from the stress asset or ARC industry would be hardly, let's say 15-20,000 crore even now, maybe, which is available for investment. So if you take into account it, even at the value of 30 cents, you can buy assets of about 60,000 crore in cash if you have to buy. So, and we are talking here of 10 lakh crore. So, even if you take corporate segment, we are 5 lakh crore. So, in 5 lakh crore, if you have to sell, you need huge money. So, you need a lot of capital. So, this 15% requirement itself is actually dampener. But the deals can happen. Either banks have to start looking at security receipt structure with some structuring, or you can have some sort of a short. Otherwise, cash deal will be limited only. Whatever number of funds you can have in a year, you can see 15-20 cases. Manish can add to that because he does the deals. He is aware of both the sides. Manish.
Thanks. Thanks, Ab. I think you have covered it very well. I agree with you. Even pre-COVID, as Saab said, we were not seeing many deals anyways. And post-COVID, it is extremely difficult, to my mind, for some of the cash deals to happen. I think unless and until, again, I just have one more addition to what Mr. Bansal said, that unless and until the banks start really looking at the fundamental change again has happened of uncertainty. I think that's a very fundamental change in this world of stress versus pre-COVID world of stress. Now, despite whatever cycle you see, nobody will be able to have a view on this recovery part. And therefore, when you have this uncertainty, just going to the basic principles, I think the banks have to start looking, if they want to do a deal, they have to look at the equity component in the construct as well. So far, the banks were like, okay, take some equity stake, which is as a part of a process so that nobody can say that, okay, you left the equity upside, but it was never a part of a construct in a real serious fashion. Now, if I have to deal with uncertainty, and I know I have a hope that these companies will come back, these situations will recover, then I think how they really look at an equity structures in a deal or taking an equity. And we have a classic examples of a very successful programs. Now, while it was done by a Fed in US in 2008 of a TARP program, but the bottom line was that the equity stakes in some of these companies really paid them very rich dividends. They made a huge returns out of these when these turn around. So I think unless and until, so there are 2 or 3 ways, as Mr. Bansal summarized. Either you look at ARC kind of a structures, and that makes sense in many cases, because some of the cases, as he said, construction companies, there are no buyers. You look at a restructuring solution. Again, there has to be a very good sort of a view on what is a realistic sustainable debt rather than you managing your balance sheet. And therefore, the other components of June 7 circular becomes a little bit challenged there to do a restructuring. Or you have to look at if you want a cash deal, you have to look at an equity component very differently what we have been seeing so far. So I think those are the three ways, to my mind, if the deals has to happen, and a combination of these three to make some of the cases actually have a resolution.
Hey, thanks, Manish. And actually, maybe we can even open that up to other panelists. So, Praveen, Sonali, if you want to come in as well on what, if you want to come in on how we can bridge the pricing gap, please feel free.
See, the pricing gap, everybody knows it exists. And there are no dearth of buyers, definitely. There are no dearth of, but I'll take that statistic that Mr. Bansal said a little further, in the sense that, see, everybody, all the buyers are very busy, even with their small volume or small percentage of work that we have that is happening. But in absolute numbers, is that number making an impact on the number of deals? Is it making an impact on the 10 lakh crore or 5 lakh crore of loans that need to be resolved? This pricing mismatch is an issue. And then, as Manish, of course, pointed out, it's pretty obvious that now the uncertainty is more than was before COVID. And uncertainty means risk increase. Risk increase means pricing again has to factor in uncertainty. But I think as buyers, we'll of course look to the sellers a little more because we are in an uncertain world. But I think if parties are flexible, right, and I think if we can use this opportunity to create a new normal, which is an improvement on the old normal, right? Like if we can move that, if we can remove the old reasons for the pricing mismatch, and then try to address only the COVID-related ones, we could get to a landing faster. Is my thing. It's like, I would say, if there is some flexibility and if we take bespoke deals, what both the gentlemen said, all the various, you bring in equity into the picture, and you bring in the promoter into the picture, and banks willing to come to the table sooner, on time. And of course, people like us, the buyers, also looking on a more periodic and flexible approach. We can find solutions. I would think we should use this opportunity to find a true new normal on the pricing mismatch part. That is what I think.
Yeah, I think, Praveen, what's interesting is that I think everybody on this session actually can contribute to bridging that gap.
Yes.
The ERC industry can buy the debt, convert it into equity. The private capital industry can refinance some of that and take it in the form of NCD. So the bank gets cash, but you take on some of that risk, you reprice the instrument. Of course, us as counsel will help. So I think there are solutions we need to find. What I feel is slightly unfortunate with the uncertainty is that I hope we don't rely more and more on the Swiss challenge way of finding the right price. I'm not a big fan of that. I think that's there are better, more elegant and faster ways, and so I hope the industry can find that. But speaking of uncertainty, Sonali, I have to ask you about the IBC ordinance. With the bright line 25 March test, the never ever clause, how do you interpret the IBC ordinance, and what are the challenges that you are seeing?
Sure. So Ashwin, the IBC ordinance has thrown a bit of a loop to most of us, because while we were expecting the first part of the clause, we were not expecting the proviso. And okay, so they have, I think the objective is clear that borrowers need to be given a little bit of breather with the COVID situation, and to put them into IBC on the basis of non-payments during this period is harsh and doesn't work well for them. The problem is that we are dealing with a spectrum of borrowers. Many of the borrowers had months before the COVID, and for those, if I've had it for prior to 25th March, then yes, I can still go ahead with IBC. I think that's what it says. But if my default happens to be post 25th March during this, then the proviso goes on to say that I cannot ever do IBC, which I think a lot of people are struggling with, saying, why is my right taken forever after you gave me a sort of an efficient for taking it away for this period forever? Why? So I think these things need to be ironed out. But I think Mr. Bansal mentioned that to this, but in the larger spectrum of the volume we're dealing with and the amount restructuring which we need to do, it will still be a smaller part. But of course, to lenders who are right now looking at a problem, have default, they need to deal with them. It's not a happy situation because I just happen to have my final maturity in this period, and then I don't have. That's not great, I think.
Praveen, do you want to react to that? I mean, I hear some alternate capital providers saying that, look, it's a 6-month suspension, so we don't expect a default in that 6-month period. But it's not so simple, and I know you're smiling. And secondly, I think the larger question is for us in the audience is to sort of remind ourselves how you sitting within a fund think of uncertainty. How do you solve for uncertainty? What are the models that you try and put on it? What helps you get out of it? So a specific question that, does this ordinance affect you and how? I mean, it does affect you, but how are you thinking about solving for it? And how do you generally think of uncertainty? If you could share some thoughts.
Sure. So I'll take the specific question first and then come to the uncertainty point, although I think we did touch on it already. But see, IBC, the situation we are faced with is IBC was settling into a kind of, IBC started off with a lot of questions, right? Because it was a big bang and there were a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainties, so to speak. And they got so slowly. Some people may say slower than would have been ideal. But we have come to a landing on many things. What is financial debt, financial creditor? How do you, whether it be the SR judgment, the JP judgment, we have reached a certain stage. Now, this ordinance in that long road is as of now, a 6-month finite period stop. And it can become 1 year. But if you look at the whole journey, the IBC is still at that nascent stage of development, right? It has not yet delivered, or while there are some big top 12, top 10, some resolutions, the real meat of what the IBC is meant to achieve, which is restructuring and insolvency, restructuring of companies without all the press around it, the smaller companies, the mid caps, like there are thousands, I think there are 3,000 plus insolvencies which have started under the IBC, rough numbers. And we are still having around 2,200 outstanding. We have only had resolutions in the hundreds. So when you keep it in that perspective, I don't think the 6 months is a big thing. We understand we are in uncertain times. We are in COVID situations. Borrowers are facing genuine difficulties. And yes, as lenders, we have to live with this. What Sonali said is definitely a key point that every lender would like clarity on. We hope it comes through quickly from the IBBI itself, recognizing that there is a little bit of clarity required in that proviso. But honestly, if we could use the 6 months to maybe catch up on a lot of work that the IBC should have been, we had used these 6 months to catch up on the IBC's progress, I would be very happy, honestly, because that is where I see the IBC. IBC is a long journey for us. It has achieved a lot, but I think there is still lots to be done. On the uncertainty piece, the reality is when there is uncertainty, there's risk. When there's risk, there is pricing. Again, I would stress flexibility as the key. We live in uncertain times, unprecedented times, but we have to be positive that there is certainty will come, and our job is to prepare for the day the certainty will come. So I have a positive outlook to it. What I see around me in my ecosystem, we are doing deals. We know that capital providers are raising capital. Capital is getting raised even during this period. So net, while there is uncertainty at the macro level, we are still moving forward.
Okay, perfect. Manish, so this means, to borrow from an old English phrase, the IBC is dead, long live the IBC, sort of so oversimplified. But where does that leave us? So what is going to be the new normal for restructuring? For example, some people believe that with the IBC threat being lifted, achieving a restructuring with debtors will be more difficult. Some others believe that the holdout problem in 7 June will now resurface. So, what is going to be the new normal for restructuring?
So thanks, Ashwin. I think 2-3 points here. One is that I clearly get what the government intent was, and then why they did what they did. I just felt that there could be a better sort of a way to do that. You could have still anyway there was a moratorium for 6 months, so there was no case for any fresh filings going to IBC for a default, right? So there was no need. See, in India, where the big part is, and I tend to agree with the first statement you made. Even if the restructurings or everybody was looking at even pre-COVID more of a outside IBC deals happening, but the real driver was there's somebody sitting at IBC, and if you don't behave, you can be taken to IBC as a court. I think that was a real driver why this entire credit culture, if I can use the word, was a behavioral change which was happening, and to some extent we achieved, and it actually got us this thing when you stop IBC in such a fashion. There are cases, for example, if I am a corporate debtor and I feel that there is no recourse available and I find it very tough to raise money, and I strongly saying again that unless and until there is an equity which comes in, the pure debt will not solve the problem post-COVID world. So therefore, if I want to go for IBC, why should anybody have a problem to stop it? If let's say 80-85% of the lenders are really come to a conclusion that there's no solution of this asset outside IBC, why should it probably have a alternate route explored at the first place? Because I have explored restructuring anyways, for that matter. So I think there could be a graded way for achieving what was supposed to be intended to be achieved. My larger fear is that the message which goes that something happens, you create a stoppage, something can happen tomorrow as well. You can have a multiple dimension. That credit culture gets sort of a disturbed. That's point number one. What is the alternative? So I think the key point is that, okay, IBC is stopped, but what is the alternative? Alternative is restructuring. If you today see in the banking system, apart from a June 7 circular, there is no tool which is available for me to do a capital structure solution, even if it is a very small solution I intended to achieve. So for example, a category 1, which I talked about, you just need a little bit of a support, little bit of a deferment. I can't even do that because only tool available is June 7 circular. Now, I think on the restructuring side, my biggest the question here is that pre-COVID world, if you look at a June 7 circular or prior to that February 12 circular, how many restructurings actually happened? If you look at the data point, hardly few. You can count them on your fingers. Now, in a post-COVID world, for example, where everybody, we are agreeing that we are living in an uncertain world, how do you get an investment grade rating from a rating agency? Because nobody is taking a view that, okay, next 3 years, you will have a V-shaped recovery, growth rate will pick up, India situation, fiscal stimulus, there's so many variables coming in, right? So you want an investment grade rating, for example, you want a promoter's guarantee, for example. So I think there are fundamental challenges that we were experiencing as far as June 7 circular is concerned prior to COVID. And therefore, my biggest concern that I have is post-COVID world, whether it gets further compounded or whether it gets eased up to be an alternative to IBC. The last point on a restructuring, and to restructuring to be effective, or any solution to be effective outside IBC, if you have to do a restructuring, banking system is anyway going through its own challenge. So while on the one hand, I have a lot of liquidity, I'm not lending. So I am wanting to lend to a AAA or AA credit, for example, anything which is like an A or a B kind of a stuff, I'm actually a little bit hesitant because I don't have a clarity, I don't have a certainty, etc., etc. So I want to play safe. Now, if you really go with the June 7 circular in the current form, and then you want to have a situation where everybody comes to you for a restructuring, for example, suppose cash deals doesn't happen, you come for a restructuring in the current sort of a circular framework, you have to provide for that even a sustainable portion of the assets. Now, what happens to the provisioning and how much of a provisioning all the banking system put together has to provide for that? Because now you're not just talking of NNPAs, you're actually talking of a good performing credit going through a stress cycle. and in the entire banking system, while some banks may be well capitalized, but can every bank who has an exposure to this credit will be actually able to do that? So I think the key point that we have to raise is that, okay, IBC is stopped, but alternative to that, which is a restructuring, is it something in the current framework more facilitative? And is there some changes we need to really do there without disturbing? I understand the requirement for a sharp monitoring, sharp governance structure, so that we don't go back to a CDR kind of a regime that we all saw what happened in that sort of a regime, for example. So I think there is surely a need to look at alternative sort of a framework outside IBC, which is a little better improved version of a June 7 circular on a restructure.
Okay, thanks, Manish. Mr. Bansal, I do have a question for you, but if you'd like to react to what Manish said about what we can learn or not learn from the CDR mechanism to apply to 7th June in future, please do feel welcome to speak on that. But I do have a question for you as well, so your choice.
No, just to add on that is CDR first round, as I was mentioning in 2000, that worked because economy picked up and the projections what were there for, let's say, doing restructuring, they worked out. In the second round, when we did the maximum restructuring between 2012 to 2014, the problem is the economy didn't pick up that fast, and the projections which were there for restructuring didn't take place. So many of those rather restructuring cases failed. So finally it's an economic condition, and I agree with Manish. So we have to look at alternatives. I mean, the cash deal situation with the banks, thinking that this entire thing will get resolved through that system, it's not going to happen. So we'll come to that maybe, but I still feel ARCs is a good system which can be looked at, but then banks have to start having some confidence, and maybe regulator also has to help in that, because this 15% requirement perhaps has to be changed, because nowhere in any other place, see, finally ARC is an asset manager. Initially when the ARC system was started under SARFAESI, there was no requirement of any investment by ARC, by the way, 0% investment, because they were agency model. Then it became 5 and then became 15. Now 15% investment for an asset manager in mutual fund industry, it is not there. In AIF system, it is not there. Maximum 2.5%. In mutual fund, the virtually it is 0. You can't expect ARCs to invest 15% in such deals. In that case, those type of deal will not happen, and that is what even FIIs have been lobbying with the RBI, that because ARCs don't have money, so they should be allowed to do deal directly. And in latest RBI guidelines, to some extent, I think we can discuss that separately. So I will.
No, so go ahead. That would have been my next question to you anyway.
So, I mean, if you see those guidelines, as far as ARCs are concerned, there is no change in the guideline. So this is just a reiteration of all the guidelines, but maybe people have forgotten. So it's a good thing that these are put at one place now. So the two things perhaps which banks can use more, which they have never used, or ARCs have also never used, frankly speaking. One is this debenture structure. See, typically when we do 1585 or any structure under SR, the redemption is not sure. And that is what caused problem to some extent, the trust deficit between ARCs and bank. So because they sold it maybe at a higher price, ARCs then could not redeem, and the economy didn't do it. And let us not forget, before 2016, there was hardly any recovery mechanism available with ARCs also. No? The ARCs were getting only those powers which were there with banks. So only after 2016, something better came up, though that also slowly we are having some doubt about that. But still, at least it was better than all the other mechanisms. And especially keeping in view, like say, as our ARCs, we did the maximum redemption in the last 2 years. Last year itself, we have done the redemption of 8,000 crore. And in one case itself, we had a recovery of 7,500. But you could not think of this type of recovery if IBC was not there. So whether it was Binani Cement or whether it was SR Steel or number of other cases, the IBC has expedited those recoveries. But then the issue is ARCs cannot buy more in cash in that sense. So with the help of stress assets, some deals certainly we will do. And many of the ARCs, the newly formed ARCs, are actually fund related only, because they are not going to do normal work. Maybe they will be doing investment as a vehicle for the funds. But then why to keep this 15% requirement? That is one point, I would say. The second point which RBI should seriously look at this provisioning requirement, that when you sell to ARCs, you still have to presume as if there is not a true sale. So you keep on making provisions. I think RBI should implement Ind AS, like say for NBFC, they have done it. So once they do it for banks, then there should not be any requirement of this provisioning as per the RBI IRAC norms. But then you have to do supposedly fair value in normal way. So I feel that requirement of continuing to make provision even if as NPA, maybe that also is a dampener. Because see, banks finally, what is the motivation for banks to sell to ARCs or to do the deals, such deals? I mean, either I get a benefit of NPA going down, or I get a benefit of provisioning going down. So if provisioning doesn't go down as per the new norm, so I will not sell under SR structure in that sense. And NPA goes down only if either I can do a technical write, or if I have to make 100% provision. But I will still feel some deals will happen. How it will happen is either a lot of cases where banks are now got the capital from government, and they have made enough provision. Provisioning coverage is almost 80-90% or 70%. So those cases they can look at selling either an SR structure where they can think that upside will be there in future. But today if they try to sell in cash, like say power cases, they will get hardly 1.5 to 2 crore per megawatt. But that's not the real worth. I mean, everyone can say and everyone understands when the economy picks up, industry picks up, the power plant should give 4 to 5 crore at least per megawatt in future. But today, if you talk to a stress asset fund or ARC, nobody will give, because we can't see that possibility of recovering even that much. But if it is 1585 type structure, maybe they can get value today lower, but it will be upside, 85% upside belongs to them. Similar category is real estate. Third category is EPC segment. If you expect any company or any stress fund to buy an EPC company today and pay cash to bank, it's not going to happen. But if you do under SR structure, upside can come to bank. So deal will start happening. Maybe it will take some time, I would still feel. But RBI guideline is good thing. One, you can think of that debenture structure. Two, you can maybe even tell banks in some cases, I will do a assured redemption. Maybe you can talk of that type of thing. And third is an upside sharing can be shared in a different way. So the deals can happen in that.
Great. Thank you very much. Praveen, I know the FPI industry has been asking for liberalization of the direct loan purchase route for FPI. So if you want to share your reaction to this draft report that's been released by the RBI.
See, I think I've learned from experience that we just wait for the report to, the actual guideline to come out. But it is positive in a sense that it shows that even in these times there is people are concerned that foreign capital, they recognize that foreign capital has a role to play. I cannot agree more with Mr. Bansal here on the points he pointed out, because one of the main routes, okay, let us look at how FPI money flows into India, right? So there is the NCDs, which everybody knows, and this is bespoke structuring. But to really solve the NPA issues, it is the ARCs who we believe are a very critical part of the solution, right? And what Mr. Bansal pointed out is a very real block, even globally, forgetting even within India, even globally, for a fund manager, which is, you can look at it like that, to be required to put 15% skin in the game it's an outlier, right? You normally see 1 to 5% globally. I'm not saying any numbers are important here, but generally, if you were to reduce that 15% to say a 5%, you're tripling, by a factor of hundreds of percentage, the amount of work that, or amount of NPA that the ARC can look at. Now, on top of that, you added the fact that and that's when I come back to my point of flexibility, because as a foreign investor, what we are looking for in India is the new normal, if you say, is that, see, work was done in a certain way. It was not really working. Now let's use this opportunity to reflect and change or be more flexible in how we come across. So instead of insisting on a cash structure because it was insisted on for multiple years before, maybe move or maybe be more amenable to considering the various structures like Manish also was mentioning, right, of equity, or whether, invest or take a call that there is future returns to come in this place. Yes, regulatory decisions would help in provisioning norms, etc. But in the end, we are a flexible pool of capital. We are not tied down by any rules internally as to, we will not look at a structure. But we would like our counterparties also to become flexible and give us the opportunity to make more use of the FPI route, whether it be buying SRs, buying quality SRs, or NCDs, which are taking part in some pre-pack, pre-IBC, solution. So this is what we look at. These guidelines are, I would just say, let me just wait for the final regulations. But it's good recognition that the FPIs would like some more leeway and encouragement to invest into India.
So Sonali, Praveen mentioned solutions. One of the sources of alternate capital returns is sort of to borrow from the fund of funds is to fund the NBFCs, because they have their own stress and they have access to what should be a good pool of loans. For example, if you look at housing finance, Indians generally don't default on home loans. And I know you've been busy in this space. So what do you advise your clients as an asset class when they are looking at NBFCs? How do they fund? What are the sort of structures and challenges and opportunities that you are seeing in that kind of space?
Sure. So Ashwin, you're right. This space has been very active because the NBFCs have really needed the liquidity. So my advice on this space is only one: diligence, and more diligence. As in, you need to know, so whether you're buying the asset from the NBFC or you're lending against the asset, you need to know what the underlying asset is. And I know it sounds really simplistic to say that, but it's true. As in, we've been in a system where there's been this system of lending where we are just lending against receivables, it's a pari passu charge, etc. But now that climate is changing, people are actually, looking at very carefully what is the asset, what is the underlying security of that asset, or what is the nature of that asset, are all the legal contracts complete, etc. So that's the first step. Then I need to think through that, can I sell this asset? Okay, I've got security over this asset, or I'm buying this asset, but when the NBFC defaults, or I need to realize my money, can I sell this asset? That's a real question you need to ask yourself. If I can sell this asset, in which market can I sell this asset? Can I make a separate securitization trust and sell it over there and then find some foreign investors? Or can I find a bank or an NBFC to buy these pool of loans? Or who can I really sell it to? What are the guidelines applicable? So I think people have now started thinking through every step of the process. And also, am I lending pari passu? Are there other lenders with me? Do I have an intercreditor agreement where we will all decide how to sell? Or do I have a pari passu letter, and then how do we coordinate? Who instructs the trustee? There are all these questions which have become supremely important now, and people, I find, are really paying attention to all this stuff. And I think that's really the way forward.
No, I think that's absolutely fascinating. Couldn't agree more. Manish, we touched a little bit about sectors. I'm mindful that we are running out of time, and we want to reserve some time for questions. But are there some sectors that you think this asset class needs to keep an eye on?
That's $1 million question, Ashwin. I'm just thinking.
Put you in the money hotspot.
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, a lot of sectors now, whether you look at a little bit on let's say chemicals, cement, for example, infrastructure, again, minus some of the best, but I'm talking of if you really look at the leading signs for the revival, infrastructure as a space has to start coming up. If infrastructure starts happening, then your steel, cement, commodity cycles sort of start coming in. your manufacturing and the migrant labor sort of starts coming back, your manufacturing increase. So I think I would say that if you look at, let's say, spaces like even a little bit of an auto comp side, more on the two-wheeler sort of a side, very interesting trends we have seen in the China market, for example, when they opened up as compared to what people were thinking on the consumer behavior. So anything on a real manufacturing side, infrastructure a little bit, cement, for example, auto sector, I would be more sort of looking them very closely because they are fundamentally very, very strong companies. And if I get some equity upside, I will definitely take a buy on them. I think on the retail side and the retail sector, while there is a lot of conflicting views, a lot of people feel that the cycle will be more like a V sort of a recovery because there's a lot of pent up demand. I think to my mind, I feel I will be a little cautious on that for the simple reason that even pre-COVID, there were a lot of sectors which were under stress. I see a lot of job losses. I see a lot of salary corrections, for example. So I think the economic pain point to have a little bit of a more discretionary spend continue in that fashion. There will be a little bit of a pent-up demand because of a lockdown, for example. But I don't see that as a sign for a sustained sort of a recovery on that side. And real estate, again, I will be very, very cautious at this point in time.
Okay, I'm again just mindful of our time. We are about 7-8 minutes out. So maybe let me just take a few questions that have come in. And so thank you for sending in so many of these questions. One is that why are we not seeing M&A in the mid-market sector, especially after 29A has been relaxed, where promoters cannot, actually one second, why M&A is not happening in mid-market entities despite Section 29A? You know, Mr. Bansal, would you want to take that question? Why are we not seeing more distressed M&A, even though Section 29A is still on the books?
See, I think let us understand, other than few large cases where you had strategic interest, where those assets were so good, whether it was SR Steel or whether Bhushan Steel or Binani, I don't think we have got many offers from strategic buyers. And when you say 29A relaxation, it's by the way, incidentally, it is only for MSME. And the definition of MSME is so small today, even after revision, because now it is and. So it's investment and turnover, both. In fact, I feel it has become tightened. So if you really see, those cases are anywhere not in IBC. Those type of MSME cases, I don't think lenders take them to, maybe operational creditors take them to IBC. But otherwise, normally financial creditors don't take those cases to IBC. So mid-size cases are where assets are 200, 100 crore, 300 crore type. So they think only, I think there is an oversupply of IBC also. And people are waiting for values to go down further before you can see some. So I don't think M&A can happen only the bigger sale. Even Manish will not even work for that, no advisory, because the fees will also be small. Manish,
Sir, I to save my job in the current market will work on any situation. But I think as Saab said,
anyway,
he's saying, I think,
I'm saying size is small. I mean, that will.
Yes. Yeah. And there are not too many strategics, as Sir said. And I think the way the Ashwin, the process also has run, while it is fine that to say that, look, I mean, the existing promoters, 29 holds, but I think the way the process has run, the quality of information that you get, and I think this entire value expectation that the lenders have versus the way we work out this liquidation value, I think that has been a very fundamental triggers. I mean, you have a liquidation value which is done by XYZ, and then that is very artificial in terms of many cases we have seen, which has no connect with what is the right business value. So I think for M&A to happen, the quality of a data that a bidder gets, a new incoming guy is able to get, the process which is run, process which is not stuck in a judicial sort of a thing, and the realistic pricing expectations are must, which is what we have not seen as yet. So while we have an IBC, and Praveen alluded to that when he mentioned that, I mean, what is the real fruits of IBC in that sense, except a behavioral change. But the way the IBC process is being currently run, where you do a process take, you don't have a specialist who run these cases to go out and create a demand. and an appetite, a good quality information memorandum, for example, I think those things have to be changed a lot to really create that distress M&A market, if I can use that word.
Thank you. I think I would like to give each one of you this question. So if you could restrict it to maybe 1 or 2 sentences. What do can you share with us, and we're talking about the new normal, and also give us some a positive upliftment spirit, if you will, something to look forward to. What, if you will, can you share is a practical tip that you are seeing being used today as parties try to do deal making? Or what is the one regulatory change that you would like to see so that we are better equipped to tackle the new normal? So a practical, pragmatic tip or a key regulatory change. So each one of you, and if I may request Mr. Bansal to please start, and then Manish, Sonali, and Praveen, please.
I think I'm working in ARC, so I will go from ARC side. I think the norm of 15% investment plus the provisioning norm, if you change, then maybe we can find some resolution. And from restructuring circular, if you remove the sustainable debt to rating criteria.
The RP4.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think for my side on the practical thing, I would have a request to both borrowers and the bankers. Bankers not to look at this as their balance sheet management and be more realistic about what the pricing is to release that capital and have a further lending. And the borrowers to really see what is the current situation and then how to make a more realistic deals to survive this period. On the regulatory side, I think Bansal Saab said that already. I mean, 2 changes to my mind. One is on the June 7 circular, both in June 7 circular, this rating requirement of 2 doesn't survive, and how the rating agencies will actually look at a scenario of such an uncertainty and a global economic sort of a downturn to give somebody an investment grade rating is a fundamental question. So I need something to happen there, which is not being looked at the traditional lens of a rating being extra conservative. That's one change. Second, on the sustainable portion of a restructured debt, the provisioning requirement should go off. If after 1 year, it still continues in a default, then you can make a provision, but not to start with on the sustainable portion. 2 changes on the regulatory side.
Sonali, please.
So Ashwin, I would like to see on the practical side, more from a process perspective, that we all need to become more sort of disciplined. We need to put all our cards on the table. We need to facilitate diligence and be very upfront and listen to the counterparty, and not have this thing that we will show something and then the next round we'll show something else. We just need to be more quick and practical about it. And from the regulatory side, I would say I'd like to see a more open and flexible regime for foreign capital to come in. It should be one which covers all different routes and has ground rules, but then within that, just allow flexibility. Don't be very sticky about the routes and the requirements for foreign capital to come in.
Yeah. So see, I think everybody is on the same page that as we look for a new normal, I'm coming at it from a little different way, in the sense that I first say a very generic statement. I would like a behavioral change, or maybe we use this COVID gap to realize what was wrong and change it. And when we think about it, as I think almost every person said, it's all very minor asks, right? Like, let's not come to the table with old practices or old prejudices, right? So whether it be this minor change on which I completely agree with, because it'll unlock, it's a very easy low-hanging fruit to unlock foreign capital coming into SRs at least, because while the ARC's business will grow, which means there is more investment opportunities for us. That is definitely the 15% skin in the game. But also the medium-term provisioning changes will help. But what Sonali was saying, when we guys are coming to invest into India, what we want to see is a new India, right? People with much more clarity on what is the end game that we are trying to achieve, where is the capital that you're asking for fit in that, and you create a corporate governance or demonstrate a corporate governance which will instill trust so that we can de-risk or reduce the pricing in a very simple sense. Because if that happens, capital will come, right? Otherwise, we will go back to a pre-COVID world. But if we use this opportunity to change the behavior, I think foreign capital is looking at India, is ready for India, and is already has tracks to come through without any further. I think behavioral change is my ask, in the sense from everybody, us also. We also have to be flexible and change. But I think that is my main ask.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And there's no better way to wrap up this session. I think the new normal is new confidence. We must trust our players, give them the tools that they need to work this problem through. So I could not have done a better summary of that. Thank you very much to our panel members. That is certainly a wrap on the panel discussion and the Q&A. So over to you, Mr. Chandriyog or Aditi, if you want a concluding statement.
No, thank you so much, each one of you. Ashwin, thank you for moderating the session. And I think the new normal seems to be that all our legislator, the government, all stakeholders, whether it's regulator, has to look at something new and not rely upon what was passed or whether we should bid 15% or what we should do. Or as Sonali said, what channels are you bringing your foreign investment into it? If today the aim is to bring economy back, then we must innovate new ideas, forget the past, come on a clean slate, bring everything on the table and move forward. That seems to be, all stakeholders must unite together to do this. And I'm sure times to come, even everybody, all stakeholders, including the Reserve Bank of India, will look about it. Probably ARC will have a greater role to play in our economic situation. And we will have a better future, notwithstanding all these uncertainties. I'm sure if we all work together, we are certainly going to achieve one goal, India, a new India and a better India. Thank you very much, each one of you, for sparing your time. And we look forward for many more input from you. Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Mr. Bansal. Thank you, Sonali.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Praveen.
Ashwin. Thank you,
Thank you,
Praveen, Sonali,
Thank you, sir.
Manish.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Thanks, Praveen. Thanks, Sonali.
Thank you all.
Bye, Ashwin.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ashwin.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.